Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Outmarket.pro podcast. I'm your host, Mark Stein. Have you ever wanted to improve your personal relationship or wanted to shift your approach to making new relationships? Well, you can learn more today in this episode featuring our guest, Lari Averbeck. As a relationship coach, Lari uses workshops, seminars, and one-on-one coaching to help others improve their work, their family life, and their intimate and personal relationships. So welcome to the Outmarket.pro podcast, Lari.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's so good to be here.
So let's start with what motivated you to get into this line of business and talk a little bit about your background and what brings you to this point in your life.
You know, I have been obsessed with relationships since I was a child. My mom said I always ask the strangest questions about relationships, even from a very young on. And I think it's because deep connection has always been real important to me. And as I grew up and in dating, I was always very excited to analyze those relationships and understand why I picked who I picked and how I showed up in those relationships. I even did it with friends, as your tribe changes, as you change, there's times when you're like, does this really fit me anymore? So it's always been a real passion of mine. And I was already doing coaching. And so I figured I would go and get certified and do it right so I could really help people at a different level.
Nice. Where do you think we are? Let's just talk about this culture. Where do you think we are in terms of our ability to be effective, to be there for our people in relationships? How well are we doing?
I feel
as
like
a culture.
I feel like we're kind of at a crossroads. So whenever I see, younger people, they seem to struggle a little bit more with a more deeper connected connection. They're so much into on their phones or short text answers for answers. They don't seem to connect as well with other people on a deeper level. That said, I am very impressed by the younger generation of how vulnerable they're willing to be, how open when you do talk to them. They are very self-effacing and honest and straightforward. They seem to be more comfortable talking about how they feel. They really do.
And, just this whole gender fluidity period that we're in, I think, that's something that when we were growing up, and I'm assuming we're in the same age range, that when we were growing up, there was not a lot of fluidity, period. We were in pretty rigid roles. So I think this whole period of a little more openness about gender and that might have something to do with it. What do you think?
It's interesting you say that because my husband and I were just having this conversation last night. We went to a class and the person that was leading the class is, we're not sure if this person is male or female. This person appears one way than the other. And so we started talking to, as you approach people, if you're trying to connect with them, how much of what sex they are, does that depend? Now, for my generation, it's just very black and white. For this younger generation, it just seems, in a way, it's very beautiful because they really are looking at who the people are. And they seem not to be so worried about what that looks like sexually or gender-wise, but they really seem to be connecting at a different level with their people. I have a friend whose granddaughter, she always wants to say, well, are you gay? Are you straight? Or what, because her granddaughter hangs out with all different types of people, which is wonderful. And she's like, I refuse to answer that question because there is no one answer. She goes, there's not an answer. And frankly, it's none of your business. Mm-hmm. So I find that there's a lot of opportunity for us to learn from this movement, these new concepts that are for us that are new concepts, to really understand at a deeper level how people love. And I think it's so cool that there is a generation and a space for people just to see each other. I think that's really kind of cool.
And I think, that's part of this openness and authenticity, if you will, an attempt to really find, okay, where am I on this spectrum, and to come at the world from an authentic place. I think it really relates to that honesty
It
and
does.
authenticity.
It does. And I like that word that you say, with authenticity, honesty. I like it because if we all got really deep and we're really honest, we'd realize that we have lots of different levels of masculine and feminine in us. I know that for me as a child, I dressed like a boy. I wouldn't come if you didn't call me. My name was Johnny. And I mean, whatever. And it was because for me, boys had more fun. And then I got to an age where it was like, oh, okay, now we're moving into sexuality. So then that to me, and again, and I was very much into the theater and all those things. So to me, there was a lot of gray there. Because if I was on a desert island for the rest of my life, would I be able to be with a woman? Probably. As I started searching for my making choices as I got older, and then finally a couple of years ago decided I was going to learn to love at a different level, I started really going into what love felt like for me. So as a relationship coach, when people say to me, what's a good relationship? It really depends on you, because they're not the same. And it really is how you're connecting with another person. So for me, I started really focusing on what love felt like for me. And I met all kinds of different people and different things, and had all kinds of different considerations that I was open to. And then I found my lovely husband, David, who I might not have ever recognized as someone that I had a deeper connection to on a different level, had I not done that exercise of what does this feel like? So when you go back to that authenticity and honesty, there's a lot of different things going on with us around who we are, our sexuality, how we want to show up in the world, and how we want to relate to other people.
So let's talk about one-on-one primary relationships, which I would imagine most of your clients, that's what presents either challenges with or a desire to have one if they don't. And so let's talk a little bit about that and ways to enhance that. When you're coaching someone, and I'm sure it depends on what they're presenting as the challenge or the problem, but what are some of the things that you like to focus on in terms of how to best relate, how to have a peaceful, rewarding, fulfilling primary relationship? Just talk to us a little bit, coach us a little bit.
Well, then we'd have to really get into it, which is good. So I use a method. I call it my SVS method whenever I deal with my clients, because typically they're coming to me with a pain point. I'm not connecting with my person. I feel like a stranger to my person. I'm not sure this is the right person for me. So I start with self-assessment. So the first part of SBS is self-assessment. And I start with self-assessment because it's like, what's going on here? What is the truth? What's coming up? How's it showing up? So we analyze it from a very objective point of view. What is the problem? Is this person's being this way or being that way? And then we get into those examples. I quickly try to take people out of examples though, because then it just becomes a story. So then we want to move into the second part, which is vulnerability, the V part. And the vulnerability is really getting really honest about yourself. How are you showing up? Does this repeat itself in other relationships, not just your one-on-one relationship? What are you feeling like? Where do you think that came from? How long have you been acting that way? Do you like that behavior? Would you like to change it? So we really then take our person that we're coaching and we make it about them. And then we start to find out, what would love be for them? What would feel good for them? How do they feel like they want to connect? I can sit here and, read you a book from somebody who tells you how to connect, but if it's not authentic to you and to what you feel like and what you're looking for, it's not going to work. It's not going to be sustainable, and you're just going to be frustrated and really lonely. So then the last part of the SVS method is then speak your truth. So now what are you going to do about it? It's time to put on your big girl panties or your big boy panties and say, okay. And that's where we learn to start to communicate differently with our person. We start to learn to set boundaries. And boundaries is not about, you can't do this to me. I don't like it when you do this. This is not what I'm going to tolerate. This is not boundaries. Loving boundaries are knowing yourself so well that when something doesn't feel like love for you, you give yourself the time and the grace and the permission to step away and lovingly say, this does not feel good for me. I can't participate in this at this point. And maybe at some point, if somebody doesn't learn to respect those times where you take care of yourself, that might be an indication that this relationship might not be working for you. But until you learn to lovingly communicate that this is uncomfortable or painful or doesn't fit your value system, you're just going to start fighting. You're just going to start fighting again. So we look at that, speaking the truth, setting boundaries, putting in new patterns of behavior, putting in ways where, you don't like the way you show up and showing up differently. And also giving yourself permission to go back into that SVS system to look at your partner, because that's then looking at what's really going on. Now that I've looked at myself and I kind of get that, what's really going on here from their point of view? On a deeper level, who are they and what is showing up for them that I can tell if they're not participating? I do couples coaching all the time with one person. Not usually both people don't come, and you can get huge shifts because at that point you're going into that vulnerable space of who are they in their vulnerableness. And then that's where you connect. And that's where those conversations, when you speak your truth, that's where people feel heard and loved and connected. And you can create from that space.
Yeah. And, when one person makes a change, that changes the whole system. So you don't have to have that other person working with you in order to make that change, I've found.
I agree. And I find too that the littlest changes make the biggest difference. And I think it's because they're more sustainable. So even just watching someone learn to walk away from an argument, just learn to walk away, which isn't always the easiest thing to do, but learning how to handle that differently can be a huge shift for somebody in their relationship, both people.
How often is it that the presenting problem is high conflict, and is it more likely that it is one person that wants and needs a little more openness, intimacy, sort of a push and pull? What do you see most when people present to you?
Well, I think you're right. I think that what therapists always say, right? That it's either sex, money, or children. That's what everybody fights about. And it's never about those things, really. So I do think that it seems to be, for me, that I find the biggest thing is the person doesn't know themselves well enough or what they need well enough to be able to communicate that, take care of it within themselves first, maybe find other avenues they can also get it from, because I think oftentimes we think our person is supposed to provide everything for us. And then how do you lovingly communicate that together? Because if you're in a relationship with somebody, an intimate relationship, they want you to be happy. They don't want you to be miserable. There's that disconnect of that vulnerability and that communication of what that looks like. And while it is true that, you can only make yourself happy, you have to know who you are so that when you come to your other and you say, this feels like this for me, that there's not an expectation that they do it different, but they love you and they see your vulnerability and they try to do it different. That's where the boundaries shift a little in a different way.
Mm-hmm. In this period, in addition to the gender fluidity topic, I think the term emotional intelligence has come to the forefront in terms of relationships, in terms of our work life. It really seems like a theme that we're focusing on, at least in this culture. Talk about emotional intelligence and how important is that? How important is it that both parties in a relationship have some level of it, and maybe even be close in their levels of emotional intelligence? Just talk about the topic a little bit.
I find that emotional intelligence, I think we used to think that it was more of a personality trait. I feel like it's more of a learned behavior. I feel like people can learn to care. People can learn to connect. People can learn to hear each other. Again, it's that, how are you speaking? It's hard to hear you, even if I have a high amount of emotional intelligence, which I do. If you're yelling at me or you're being, it's still hard for me to hear you because I'm a human being, right? So it's, for emotional intelligence, I think if you and your partner are totally diverse in this area, you probably wouldn't be connecting in the first place. So, and again, that goes back to why do you pick who you pick? And that's another whole topic. So I feel like there's probably some good building blocks there to build emotional intelligence together with your person. I feel like that there's ways to close that gap, that there's ways to see. Sometimes it's allowing the space for somebody not to be exactly where you are in this area, and allowing that space and still trying to reach that space so that they have room to, grow there, move there, ask questions there. Some people take some time to move into that space and to understand or to have shifts. I think it's really important, not just even in emotional relationships, intimate relationships right now, but for all relationships, for people to leave that space for each other to explore and feel and grow, rather than just defend and come from our heads all the time where we're, defending a point of view. It's all just a story anyway. So what's your story? And are you allowing other people to tell their story?
One of the classic dances in relationships, and it may not be as prevalent today because we are moving somewhat away from gender roles with this fluidity part, but and not necessarily sexual fluidity, but we're loosening up the definitions of male and female and allowing for more a greater spectrum of behavior to be acceptable. But one of the classic dances, and one that's always interested me, is this dance between the avoider and the clinger. I don't know if you remember Harville Hendrix, relationship psychologist or therapist, focused a lot on this dichotomy. And the avoider is drawn to the clinger and vice versa. And his theory is that we're trying to heal, we're trying to meet in the middle, and the avoider, their need for growth is around being able to open up and to accept and to let people in. And the clinger, their lesson is about being okay within themselves and not having to have something from another person in order to feel whole. But it seems that those polar opposites, even if they're not polar, but they're of a different variety, that exists in a lot of relationships that I've experienced and that I see. And his theory is that it is the movement from these polar opposites to resolve these issues within themselves, which is the reason that they're drawn together to do this dance, so that the avoider breaks down some of those barriers and becomes more embracing, and that the clinger becomes more independent and not as dependent on the avoider. And that by working through these, and his theory is that it comes from not just the opposite gender parent, but the conglomeration of parents, and trying to heal from our childhood wounds that we got from our composite parents. Long-winded, I know, but can you talk a little bit about this dance and just how you see this? And is it manifesting as much now in this era as it was 20 years ago? What do you see about it?
Well, I do love the Harville Hendrix his work. I actually was trained in his imago therapy. So it is exactly, what you're talking about, and the way that through his therapy that you bring two people together is the vulnerability. You go back and you share continually when something triggers you and the first memory you have of that. So you're always trying to go back to that vulnerable stage of, so that your partner can see you as that child that's in pain, which then gives them the space to, as we said before, people love you. They want you to be happy. It's just they see you yelling at them, not that you're in pain from when your mom did this or did that. So that's a really good, and the imago stuff, it's good. It's hard. It's really hard the way in that paradigm, because it's that constant interruption. What I think I would capitalize on as a relationship coach is spending a lot of time doing your own work, so that when you're triggered, what's coming up for you, and then you can share that rather than always during a trigger. So there's a little bit to that. I find there's a really good book I just recently read on attachment styles. And there's, the 3 different types of attachment. And most of the population, like 50%, is actually in decent attachment. They're pretty equal. Then there's the avoider, and then there's the dependent or the clinger that you were talking about. And the interesting thing about that is the avoider is the one that typically ends up being more single or not able to connect, because even the clinger is still going to always be looking for someone to cling to in that. I think you make a very good point in why we're attracted to that. I know for me, I have always been more of a clinger. So growing up, it was my job, though, in the family to be highly aware of emotional cues and fix them and make sure everything was good. And I have dated people. I had a relationship where the avoidance was so strong. It was at about 12 or 13, there was a breakdown, and he basically disappeared emotionally, mentally, and found a way to do that. So what a great match, right? I'm going to overdo. I'm going to make everything great and fantastic and feel connected. And, he's got somebody that does that. And I have somebody that constantly identify or supports the idea that I need to work for it. So those relationships are always very fraught with so much turmoil, because people are coming from very deep places that they've learned to cope, and they're not sure how to move forward. You did ask, do I see more of that in the world now? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, because I feel like the more technology takes place and the more we have relationships that are based in technology and Facebook and all that stuff, I feel like people seem more connected, We all see the more pictures of our families' vacations than we ever did before. We have more cursory friends than we ever did before. How many people are following you? You feel like you've got that. But that's not real connection. That's not the kind of connection that people suffer from loneliness. And we all, I think, have parts of that, because any part of yourself that isn't totally connected to love and light is lonely. So I feel like nowadays there's a different perception of what connection is. And I think that's where that loneliness epidemic is coming from, because people don't know what's wrong. They don't know why they're depressed, why they're not satisfied, why this, because they've got all these Facebook friends. They do a Zoom call once a week with all their buddies. They do this, but they don't know what's missing for them.
And let's move away from primary relationships for a moment and talk about community. For those of you who are tuning into the Outmarket podcast, we also have another focus, which is on community, and with Thrive Co-Living Communities is another one of my involvements. And you talked about this epidemic of loneliness, and it's risen to the point that the Surgeon General has done a significant piece of work about it. And my read is that it's due to several factors. One is our growing reliance on technology and social media, which has in some ways brought us together, but in many ways separated us. Another is a significant decline in religious participation. So people are not as connected in ways that they used to be. Not that those were always rewarding and fulfilling, but it was an involvement with people. And then the other is a lack of civic participation. Back during my father's era, you were a member of some sort of social organization, JCs, Optimist Club. There were all sorts of organizing bodies, and many of those have just disappeared in this era. So it makes it harder to find relationships with people with whom we are similar and have common interests. And that's one of the reasons that I'm promoting this co-living concept and really working on that. Talk a little bit about, and speaking of technology, and before we go and talk about how to resolve it, we are entering a new era of technology that makes internet, iPhones, mobile phones, that dwarfs that in its impact. And I'm speaking of artificial intelligence, of course. So we're about to become more fragmented in ways. A lot of people are very likely to lose their livelihood. So we will even lose connections that we have had at work. So talk a little bit about building community and having meaningful relationships within community, and how can we, I think it's going to have to be very intentional, but how do we do that in this more fragmented, separated environment?
I love that you.
I know I'm asking a lot, and I don't really expect you to totally solve the problem, because
but we'll try.
This is going to be the problem of our age, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I love that you broke it into those three categories, because when you said that, I was like, oh, I actually wrote them down, because I was like, First of all, the social media gives us a false sense of connection, a false sense of security. It also actually drives us further away from each other because all we're doing is seeing what we're not doing. We think that everybody's so happy or everybody's so this or everybody's so that, that we start, what is that? FOMO, fear of missing out. There's the comparison problem, which makes you lonelier. So from the very beginning, those things make you lonelier because anything that we have in us that says that we're not enough, that we're not interesting enough, that we're not thin enough, that we're not tan enough, whatever it is, it makes us feel less than because it's not real connection. So that social media is kind of a backward slap in a way, can be. The religious is so interesting to me, as in my spiritual community, we notice now all these churches that are so empty. As you had just mentioned, the religiosity is seems like it's on the decline. I feel like as we talk about this oneness, the fluidity of things, that people are starting to learn that the life experience is all people, not just the people that we're with. Life experience now includes so many different things that the messages maybe that we learned that were very tighter or maybe stricter, they counteract, counteract if you know somebody and love somebody that doesn't fit that mold. Because now we're seeing people at a different level, right? So we're having to open that up. So I think for the religiosity, one of the beautiful things about it is it takes something that's bigger than everyone and it brings you together. I remember when I first started my relationship journey of whatever, I was in my 20s and I was like, I want to love at a deeper level. So I was, and I'm not a Christian, but I started hanging out with a lot of my Christian friends that were older than me because the paradigm they had for relating to one another, they had something bigger than them to look at. Mm-hmm. Then as I got even more into that, I'm like, yeah, but if you're not looking at each other just as people, that creates its own set of problems there as well. But even for me at that age, I understood that something bigger than me had to be something compelling enough to be able to walk away from my ego. So the deeper I got into self-assessment, I realized that God was within me. For me, that's what it was. Spirit, light, connectivity was within me. So I trying to learn to connect with that more so I can show up and people will recognize who I am based on my heart. And the third thing with civic, I think is interesting because I think that is, you know what, how do you feel love? You give love. How do you feel less lonely? You make someone else feel less lonely. So the whole idea of this civic connection is fantastic because it takes something bigger than you, but that's more tangible, right? A playground for these people, a park for this. So it takes something more tangible in the civic realm that we're all building together. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be about our connection to spirit or God or whatever, but it's a connection to something we love and we believe in. So I love that you pulled that out of there because when you talk about how do we do this different? How do we reconnect? I think first and foremost, it's to go in and understand what's important to you. What are your values? What are your strengths? Where do you feel the most connected? Is it when you're pulling weeds? Is it when you're having a deep conversation with your best friend? Is it when you're cooking? Is it when you're reading a book? So you pick those things that you internally really fill you up and make you feel connected. And then hopefully there are ways then that you share that with other people. You join a gardening club. You start a community garden. You participate, even if you're not a starter, you participate in a community garden. And now you've learned to take something that from your very heart, soul, authentic depth of your core fills you up and you share it with others. You create from there with others. You learn to have a a shared space, a shared love, a shared intimacy with each other based on something that's really authentic and core for you. I think that would be where I would start.
If I may, I'd like to share some thoughts. I'm in the process of, and this is Thrive oriented still, of creating the platform that would best help build and foster community. So I'd love to get your feedback on it, and it'll help me evolve with what I'm thinking too. So starts with a survey of interests, passions. What do you like to do? Sports activities, theater, movies. What are your interests? What kind of foods do you like? So that we can, once we gather this information, and I'm working within an existing community. For the longest time, I've tried to create a new community from the ground up. And I kept running into issues of location. The property would get sold. There would be something wrong with the property that it wouldn't fit for the purpose. So I'm working with an existing community of about 180 families that already live in the same neighborhood and are members of the same association, homeowners association. So we take all those interests, and then for part of it, give people the ability to say, okay, for everybody who loves Italian food, who would like to order a pizza and have it at the pool, or have a movie night to watch horror films? That's a horrible idea for me. I hate the idea of horror films, but who likes horror films that would like to get together and share that? Or who likes to play golf and belongs to one of the many country clubs, golf clubs in the neighborhood? So I find out who in the community is already a member and get those people together to do an activity. So that's one part of it, and have it be an open platform so that people can go in, find who is interested, and send by email or by text an invitation to all those people to go do something, do a particular activity. Another aspect of it is a tool sharing co-op, if you will, so that everyone does not have to have a weed eater. Everyone does not have to have a carpet shampooer. Everyone doesn't have to have a 20-foot extension ladder. That we could pool those resources and have an inventory, check them out, have a series of credits so that when we lend, we'll earn some credits to be able to borrow, and share those. And then the final initial concept is a skill sharing co-op, where we find out what skills people have and interest. And if we need to have an essay written, we can reach out to that person who's a writer and trade labor hour for hour to be able to share experiences and to share our skills with people in the community. Only those things that we want to. If I'm an accountant by profession and 50 hours a week, I probably don't want to share that in the community.
Right.
I probably just want to get paid for that. So these are all things that can build relationships, that can build interaction, and then hopefully some of that magic that happens when neighbors get together and share a pizza or or just a topic that they're interested in and share that topic in a presentation, or bring a friend who's an expert in real estate investing to come and do a workshop. So give me some feedback and some ideas on what does this do? You focus on relationship. What kind of impact can something like this have?
I love it. I love it. I love that you've taken the concept of, what they love, what they're good at, and sharing. I love all those. I would say where I think that you could maybe dive a little deeper is when you ask the questions of, like, what do you love? Also ask it in a way of, what could you do for hours on end and not realize the time had gone away?
Passions.
Right. So that when people, you want what they're really connected to, you want to get them in that heart space, not their head space.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you put them in a heart space to share this with you? Right. So there would be those ways. I think it would be kind of cool too. How could you get them? So, like, I don't know if you've seen the character strengths clip. I have a whole book on it. I should go grab it. But it's a 5-minute free test online that people can take, and it kind of gives you a more in-depth idea of what their character strengths and those kind of things are. That way, you get a deeper idea of how people might want to or can participate. That might also be a lead into, well, guess what, Mark? I'm an extreme extrovert. You're never going to get any problem from me talking about I want to go order a pizza. What about the people that are not extroverts, or that are really shy, or that are not? Loneliness is an epidemic. When you are super lonely, you're depressed. You have a hard time even moving away from that. You probably have a hard time even coming up with what you enjoy doing. So how do you reach the people that are really lonely, or the people that their gifts are more in maybe listening, or their gifts are more maybe in work that they do by themselves? So we don't want to assume that just because you like gardening, you want to do it with everybody else. So how could you participate? So I'm not sure, but where I feel like all those things can go a little deeper is, how do you see the people that aren't normally seen? How do you facilitate their participation? Maybe it's, I don't know if the strengths test would tell you this, but maybe it's a different questionnaire. I don't know what that looks like, but when you know that certain people are lonely, or certain people are introverts, or certain people are struggling in some way, shape, or form. Not that being an introvert is struggling. My husband is an extreme introvert, and he loves that in there. He loves it in there. So, but how do you get those people to share what their strengths and bring them to be a part of the group and part of the table, so it doesn't just end up being, all the extroverts that are already going out and doing these kind of fun things are doing that? How do you bring in other people? And maybe it's something like the facilitator of, maybe it's in each section, kind of recognizes where the strengths are or where the vulnerabilities are of certain folks, and tries to draw them out or ask them to do things that they think that they would want to do or could do, because they may not step up because they don't see how to do it. So I think that would be my feedback. And I got a lot to say. So,
and as you were talking about that, I envisioned a couple of, and I'll just be gender stereotyping here, a couple of older women who like to do needlepoint, sitting in one of their homes, two or three, quietly doing needlepoint and maybe sharing what they're doing, but that sort of quiet sharing, and that would be the hardest thing to bring out in people,
right.
To facilitate that sort of coming together.
So that's a good example. So if you have people who do that quietly and you figure out a way that you start to understand what that's looking like these people that you're talking about, it would be, would you be open to adding 1 or 2 people to your circle to show them how to needlepoint?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll invite them and tell them where you are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
But it could just be a matter of facilitating an interest group. And once they know that they like needlepoint, sort of like bridge groups, that once you've got a group of people, it may feed itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that group would say, okay, how often, mainly I like to do needlepoint by myself quietly at night, but maybe once a month, why don't we get together and share what we're doing and share techniques and that sort of thing. So maybe it would be facilitating forming clubs, if you will, around certain interests. And some of them could be very quiet, and some would be large.
And and to build on what you're saying, that would go back to your questionnaire. When you ask the questionnaire, do you typically do activities by yourself with 1 or 2 people? How often do you like to be with a group of 5 or more people? So that way, whenever you see that somebody says, yes, I do needlepoint and I like doing it one-on-one, you might then, if you're trying, again, if you're trying to draw people out, it's, would you be willing to add my thought on that is, not everybody's a joiner. Somebody might even, you get them to fill out the survey, you're lucky, right? Because that's a lot of participation. So how do you do that in a way that you kind of help them? Because they're probably not going to do that. And even if they did, it would be a stretch for them. So if you still want to include them, how do you do it at a different level? Here's the deal. The cute little lady that goes to be the 3rd person and learns it, she might be an extrovert. So she might go, I'm starting my own needlepoint group, right? So it's, how do you use those strengths and talents across the board and invite people to things that I feel like oftentimes people need to be invited or asked to do it, not just to join, but to do it. But you want to make sure you're doing it in a space that's comfortable for them, so that A, they're more likely to do it, and B, that they connect with it.
And I do envision that the invitation format could be inviting 1 other person or inviting everybody who's interested in needlepoint. So it'll be set up along the lines of check boxes, so that they can check what the interest is and invite people and check the boxes of the people they want to invite. So there's a lot of specificity in it. Okay, well, I don't want to.
That would be good. Also, I might add to that, people learn different ways. People communicate differently. So maybe check boxes, also an area where they could fill stuff in. And maybe another area where they could, I don't know what I'm trying to say next, but how do people communicate? So what would be best? And is there any component of this where somebody goes and knocks on somebody's door? I think that would be a big deal, especially if it's an older group, because again, I have had depression in my life. And I know that when you are in a space or you feel shut down, you just need somebody to look at. You need face-to-face. You need a face-to-face contact. And that could be the impetus to just moving you forward.
And my hope is that there will be someone, the community is organized by streets and small little cul-de-sacs. And I understand that there are already cul-de-sacs that have a block party, their own group. So they're bound to know someone in the cluster, and it may be that someone who knows someone else that would enjoy this activity would just personally invite. Well, I don't want to dominate, and I've never done this in the podcast, But I really appreciate the feedback and being able to sort of share what I'm thinking, because I'm very much in the creative space, to create this this entity. But let's go back as we start to wrap up here. Let's go back to the interpersonal, and back to the one-on-one, which I suspect is more your forte. And let's talk about this for a few minutes. Everyone, based on their level of pain and hurt and life experience, we present with different levels of intimacy. And I think in partner relationships, it's very difficult to find that person who is at roughly the same level of intimacy and acceptance of and openness, because we've all experienced different experiences, and mainly pain and suffering. And I would suspect that's, again, one of the themes that keeps coming back, not just the avoider and the clinger, but people who are at different levels of tolerance for intimacy and openness and sharing, and which makes it really difficult for people to come together, couples to come together, if they are misaligned in terms of that. So you've got the person who's healed themselves a good bit. They've been through pain. They're not immune to it, but I've done that. I've been there. You can't hurt me in that way. I'm still going to be vulnerable and open. And then you've got the person who's less tolerant of that, because maybe they've had experienced more pain in relationships, or maybe they've worked through less of it, so they just don't have the tolerance. I'm sure this is a common theme. Talk a little bit about your thoughts and experiences and guidance in that sort of situation.
It's interesting how people present themselves for wanting to learn more about connection. So I have an event that I call Refresh Your Date Night. And I have about 12 people, because I usually try not to do more than 6 couples at a time. And I have it at my house because I want it to be a very intimate, safe space. And when I talk about it, it's fun. We're just going to do some light, fun exercises. On the last one I did, which I will be repeating because I have more people that want to come to this, is on listening, right? How do you make it non-threatening and fun, and just a way to show up and go, what else? So when you come to your partner and you're like, I'm not happy and we need to go do something about this.
We need to talk.
That's right. Right. And remember, a therapist takes you back into your life and figures out where the pain came from and how you're bringing it into your current space. Coaching takes you from where you are now, and you might go back a little bit to start to figure things out. But coaching takes you where you want to go. So if what you want, let's just say you're like, I would just like to not feel like my person is my roommate, which we just had a little bit more connection and a little bit. So when you take it from, we're not going to go back necessarily, we're going to move forward. So what do we want this to look like? I mean, that could be visualizations, that could be fun, that could be as simple as one person going, hey, let's sit down and talk about where we want to go for a long weekend vacation. But the person who is bringing that up is probably the one who's been through some coaching on their own. So they know what might work or what might bring that forward, or, hey, this girl that I've been doing my individual coaching with, she has a thing called Refresher Date Night, and it's really fun. And it's just some couples getting together. So it's, how are you positioning it? Are you positioning this so that somebody needs to change, something needs fixed, or are you manifesting a better life for you both? And quite honestly, that mostly looks like us one-on-one having some deeper conversations about what you want, what's going on with you, how can you manifest that, how can you show up. But if just one person does that and comes to the table with, hey, there's this cool workshop, or I learned this in my coaching thing today. I learned that I'm really excited about when we do weekends together. So I had some ideas for weekends. Which one of these sounds good to you? So sometimes the one person is coaching their partner through the coach. And sometimes it's we get together and we coach. And I love my favorite, honestly, Mark, is the group work. My favorite is the group work because people learn so much from each other. They feel like they're watching. I had on my last Refresher Date Night, I was so surprised. More of the men talked than the women because they never get a chance to talk about this stuff. They don't even know how to start the conversation, or that it even is a conversation, right? So the men were very participating. And when the one guy saw the other guy doing it, then the other one came up. And then the other one's like to his wife, do you mind if I share? And she's like, no. And so, so they start sharing. You don't have to share if you don't want to, but even the quietest person is learning from what's going on around them. And the energy of that is so good. And it's such a safe space. And it was funny when we talk about the stereotypes, I had more women in the group go, oh my God, I don't listen. I didn't realize I wasn't listening. I thought I was, but I wasn't. Mm-hmm. So they start listening to each other. And to me, the group is the most fun. It is where so many, and that is where I often get my one-on-one people, because they go, I want to go a little deeper into this, or I want to talk more about this, or I realize I'm not a very good listener, and I wonder how I can be a better listener. So I love both. I love it all. The seminars and the podcasts, they're great too, because then I, get people like, you mentioned something that I'm a little interested in. So sometimes people are the voyeurs, they want to kind of like pick and choose what they want. So they go and sign up for my weekly newsletter, which, shameless plug, go to Lari@laricoaching.com and send me an email, or go to just laricoaching.com and you can sign up for my newsletter. It's a video email. I do videos every week on a subject. But that way people can kind of voyeuristically learn a little bit, ask a few questions, throw something out there, and dabble in it a little bit. So there's all kinds of different ways, but nobody is at the same place at the same time. And so how do you take responsibility for yourself and what you want in your life, show up in a way that you're proud of and that you feel good about and connected to, and see what happens and see what shows up? That's what I would say about that. You can't drag somebody through therapy or coaching or a marriage or a relationship. You want a willing participant, but it all starts with you. I used to manage a bunch of sales reps, and I used to say, if everybody else on the road is driving like crap, it's probably you. So what are the common denominators there? They're yourself.
Speaking of group activities, I just remembered, is that a word? Probably not. A group activity, and we were planning to have a group of people over. It did not work out, that somewhat knew each other. And this game from maybe 10, 15 years ago is called Scruples. Did you know Scruples?
I do. Remind me though of what it is, though. What I do.
Yeah, so it has to be people that know each other. They can't just be total strangers. So each person gets a question, and it's an ethical dilemma, and they have to say how they would handle that dilemma, and then everybody votes on whether they're telling the truth or bullshitting their answer. And it really leads to some fun discussions. I remember one time the maddest I've ever been at anybody that I knew well. The question for me was, if you're walking along a deserted beach and you come upon a couple that's having sex on the beach, do you watch? And the answers are yes, no, or it depends. And if you say depends, you have to explain why. And so I said, it depends. It depends on how good they were, how attractive they were, just depends. And everybody called bullshit on me and said that I would stand there and watch no matter what. And I was furious in a congenial sort of way. But anyway, so speaking of technology and linking this to technology, I looked up the game on Amazon, and it was something outrageous, like $89 for a board game or something. And it's because it's so dense. Well, I went to Chat GPT and I said, remind me of the rules or how Scruples is played, and give me 10 sample questions. And out it spits some great ethical dilemmas. It knew exactly how Scruples was played, and I'll use it in the future, but it saved me $90 on the board game. So anyway, if you've got a group of people that know each other somewhat, maybe if you get this group that you had that decides to repeat, or most of them repeat, then they'll gradually get to know each other a little better. Anyway, so let's wrap up. And you've already given us a little bit of an inkling of how people can relate with you and communicate with you. And I love the idea of a video newsletter. That's a great masterpiece of an idea. I may borrow it. But talk about how people can reach you and best connect with you.
So Lari is Lari. So if you go to Lari, laricoaching.com, that's my website. So it gives you a little bit more information. It breaks down that SBS method we talked about a little bit, and it gives you an opportunity to sign up for the newsletter. Also, if you wanted to do, if you had something that you really thought you wanted coaching on, if you thought, I wonder if this would be good for me, or if this is something that would work for me, Lari at laricoaching.com is my email address, Lari. And we can talk a little bit to see. I always ask people what they want coaching on, why now, and to see if there's something that I think that we can, kind of dig into a little bit. And then if there seems to be something there and a willingness to do the work, to go in and do the work, then maybe we can set up a complimentary call or something like that. Happy to
about groups. Do you
Well, for groups, I do have my refresher date night is going to be coming up again in September. So you can check my website for that. It's going to be on a Saturday night, probably the one after the Memorial Day weekend. And we'll be doing listening skills again on that. So if you're interested in that, you could always email me at laricoaching.com and say, I'm interested, send me the dates when you get it. I'm also on Facebook. My Facebook is Get Real in Relationships. So I always post my videos there, and I have Lari Averbeck YouTube channel where all my videos are hosted if you wanted to see all the videos in one spot. So those are some good ways, but reach out to me if you have any questions about how you want to create your life moving forward. Remember, coaching is about where are you and where do you want to be? How do you want to explore? If not sure, you just want to explore what you want and how to get there. Because, it all starts with yourself. And sometimes we just need a little help, a little collaboration, a little energy, and a different perspective to help us move that way.
Great. Well, this has been rich. I've really enjoyed it and learned something, and you've given some things to think about, and I'm sure that others will agree. So thank you so much for your time and your insights, and thanks for listening to me on the Thrive idea. You've helped me get some things together, so thanks for that.
Good. good. I'm a good collaborator. I love collaboration. That's probably why I like those group things so well too. But thank you so much for having me here. It's been a delight to talk to you. And it's funny, even the more I share and hear what you're asking, it opens me up to different possibilities and different avenues and things. So I've learned quite a bit too. And I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Well, let's wrap up here. So I want to thank Lari Averbeck for joining me today on the Outmarket.pro podcast, and sort of a merging of that with the Thrive Co-Living podcast, sharing more about her work as a relationship coach. Be sure to check out the show notes down below. We'll put all of those ways to contact her down in the show notes, so you can didn't have to jot it down as you were listening to it. To learn more about Outmarket.pro and how we help small business owners find marketing solutions, you can learn more about us also in the show notes below, or visit us online at www.outmarket.pro. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you'll be notified when there are new episodes. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks again to Lari, and we'll see you next time.